Go ahead and begin the Land Use Committee meeting for the City of Port Orchard, March 25th, 2019 at 9:30. Why don't we go around the room and do a quick introduction.
Mark Dorsey, Public Works Director.
Doug Price, Code Enforcement Officer.
Carrie Salee, Planning.
And Scott Diener, Council.
Sean Kuchardi, Council.
Fred Chang, Council.
Nick Bond, Development Director.
Okay, everybody's on record. First item is a request for marked parking spaces on Kitsap Street. Mr. Dorsey.
Yeah, the city received a request from the United Methodist Church that's Kitsap and Sydney if they could have marked parking. The reason being, just for people, where you can see in that one photo, even though that's not on the side of the street, but it illustrates where people tend to just park and then there's like a half a gap. Well, that's where a garage is, but where there's just, to put these kind of half stalls and it's not efficient. I think from the Public Works Department's perspective, we get that, but we only mark, and you can see that those are thermoplastic. Mm-hmm. And there's only limited areas in the city where we mark on-street parking. Bay Street, Prospect, certain parts of Sydney, up by Givens, down in this area.
A threshold by which you determine?
No, it's just what's in. It's basically what was established in previous administrations decades ago. There's been no rhyme or reason to it. Mm-hmm. What I can say is this, and that is it's extremely labor intensive from a budgeting standpoint. It's work that I have to have people come in off hours and do, because I have to do it when the cars aren't there. So if we were to add parking in this area, it's just going to add more maintenance costs, because we'll need to be, applying it the original and then go back with our other markings. And then I guess the other aspect is, we're going to do this for maybe, one complete parking stall. There's still, the parking's there. It's just that odd time when somebody parks in a bad spot and doesn't, move up and leave the right amount of space. And you may not get any more cars in there as well, because, our parking standard is fairly liberal.
How long are those widths, do you think?
They're huge.
12,
I think
15
it parks less cars than what would actually fit here
Yeah.
without the striping.
A normal parking space is 20 feet long, a parallel parking space. Mm-hmm. I think the city they go 18, and then they have that bigger gap, and again, it would be more, and that's just what we've inherited, and that's what the city's been doing for years.
That's like a motorcycle spot or the
Every two spots they have a gap.
Every two spot they have.
they have to?
I thought it was just for pedestrians to access the building, but I've seen motorcycles use it.
No, that's the
standard.
That's a pattern that the city adopted years ago in certain areas, and it's to go with an 18-foot stall and then the gap instead of just 20, 20, 20. Okay. I'd rather just go 20, 20, 20.
Oh. So these are not even enforceable. I mean, without signage, you can't enforce parking.
No, people don't.
No, but it's a guide, because I can understand where if you have a huge area there, people don't know, like, if they're parking in a good spot, or if they're blocking. I think they have a point that it might be more efficient if you had designated spots. Like, let's say there's 10 there instead of the variable, but I don't know from your point if you would fit more in by doing those.
I think you'd get less.
Designated spots.
I think over 8 marked spaces, you'd probably lose one spot.
So there might be
overall.
7 instead of 8 or something.
The other aspect that I want to acknowledge is this obviously wouldn't be parking for the church, because the city doesn't provide on-street parking. And definitely not to a private use. Their parking lot technically their parking lot is supposed to be adequate in size for their congregation. So we're kind of bordering also on this. This is more of an efficiency request. And again, I don't see the added labor and materials and the cost associated as really being anything that's measurable in efficiency.
Are there standards by which we would allow them to do it? Like
No.
they get to maintain and
No, because all we'd be doing at that point is they
Is
would say that
enforcing.
that's their parking, and
Oh.
we can't have public parking designated to a. We put in a handicap stall. I think it's around the corner.
It wouldn't be on the hill, would it?
It might have been, I'm not sure. Excuse me.
there is. I don't know.
I guess
Is it on Prospect?
It must be the one that was up.
Yeah, there's one on Prospect.
No, but I think we did one up for near the museum. Maybe. Oh, that is the museum.
Yeah, I don't remember one by the museum.
What I was going to ask is, why is the yellow so much farther on
That side?
this side? I mean, it seems like there's a
Yeah.
whole parking space here, and there is a fire hydrant, but that's certainly way more than 15 feet.
I would have to check with Mark, and I noticed that as well. I don't know if it's a sight distance issue, but I can confirm.
Hey, Mark, do those parking ticks have to be thermoplast? Could they be painted?
Well, you know, our standard is that they're thermoplastic because they last longer. Is that we don't have to do, we'd have to do it every year
Oh, okay.
if they were painted.
Do we care if people paint the curbs with their address number? I mean, we don't care. We're neutral, right? What I mean by care is, are we neutral if people want to do that?
I've never.
We don't have a policy.
That gives,
Okay.
I think that gives the impression that that parking spot.
No, I'm not even talking about this park. I'm talking about on the curb if you had an address so people could find out, oh, this is like 74.
I don't think
or
I've
this is-
seen that in the city at all.
Because I know where I used to live, there would be volunteers that would charge you $5 to paint your
stencil it.
curb. Yeah, stencil it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a nationwide organization that goes around and encourages that, and tries to get people to do that.
Yeah, I would do it. I should probably do it and just say there's nothing saying you can't.
So I can definitely look into that yellow and see why in particular. My guess is it has to do with the fire hydrant. It's just with that location.
Yeah.
It does
There's a
seem
distance
kind of
either side of the hydrant. Because if you look down the other side, that's
Maybe to allow enough length to park a
But the-
fire truck there.
The fire hydrant length is 15 feet, as is the sight triangle, I believe, which is why this side is striped.
Right.
yes. I don't
So-
know why that's double, but I'm sure there's a reason.
So, Mark, I get that if you were to mark it with those tick marks, that you might not be able to get as much parking in.
There's until you actually lay it out. I don't know if you would actually gain more. And then even though the tick marks are there, people.
But their perception, as they've written here, is that people just aren't parking well to begin with, and so.
But the tick marks don't necessarily. We see out here, out in front of Prospect and City Hall. I see it all the time where people are still just parking.
No, I
Poorly.
get that. I
Willy-nilly.
think you're just going to have to articulate that with them.
Yeah. Well, and again, like I said, by the time we lay it out,
Well, and if
it's just no guarantee.
If we
A
could
bunch
pull
of
back the
small
yellow.
cars, you get way more in there
Yeah.
than if you
Yeah.
have a bunch of big trucks.
Right,
Yeah,
we're gonna-
smart
we're
car
gonna-
parking. And
Yeah.
Yeah, you stripe it for a pickup truck, and
Right. It's one size fits all,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Right.
There's nothing if they were to chalk it on weekends, right?
Well,
we don't care.
they want to
I
do
think-
chalk art.
Yeah.
I think they should just, before they begin each sermon, hey,
I think we should
just
give
a
them
reminder.
10 feet
Park nice.
of gray curb where it's yellow, and
Well, I'm going to look into that.
Yeah.
I'm going to see why that's that far out. That's the one thing that
Yeah.
we could definitely do is black that out if it's warranted.
And that would be interesting to pace that off and say, if we stripe it, you're going to lose one, but we found a way to, and I'm not saying we can, but reduce some of this yellow and actually pick you up another, so your 2 parking spots to the good by
Right.
not
So
going
what,
down this path.
in spite of all this, what if they say we want this anyways?
We say no.
Can we charge them? Say that there's a cost of like $200 a year for labor? Or?
No, the issue is then they're going to say that that's their parking, and we can't have
Beneficial use.
we can't have on-street public parking for any individual. Same thing with when we mark an ADA stall down on Frederick. The lady that wanted the ADA stall there because it says, well, we can put one there, but that's not yours. anybody, and she wanted it
Any-
for
any-
herself. It's
any
public
handicap
parking
could
on
use
the
it,
street. The church is supposed to have adequate. Theoretically, the church is supposed to have enough parking down below in their parking. They shouldn't be parking on the street. I mean, that's my hardcore answer. Is
I don't know. I mean, this is in a walkable part of the city. I think that we're not.
We could say that about City Hall. We don't provide enough parking for the employees
I-
here.
the
Don't get
city-
started on that now.
The city actually
Don't
should
you get
have.
started.
They did have parking in their original design, and they valued it out.
Yeah, so we're not providing enough parking for
We're not
employees here.
providing. No,
Or
and
any, actually.
We are in non-compliance. I
Yes,
completely agree.
yeah.
All right, so just to wrap this one up, you're going to suggest that we'll look at getting them some parking by pulling back on the yellow,
I'm gonna look and see why the yellow is that far.
and
out.
that we wouldn't be supportive of the tick marks because that actually can decrease the available amount of parking.
It can decrease the amount. It just adds added cost
Well,
to the city
to the city, yeah.
and work.
Yeah.
So-
Okay.
Okay, I will follow up with, at least with Nick and Carrie. I'll just send an email to them about the yellow.
Okay, item number 2, amendments to our nuisance code, administration enforcement, and vehicle service and repair. Mr. Bond.
Mr. Price.
Okay, I brought a whole stack of stuff here, so I think maybe start with what I think is the simplest one, which is the 2002-060, the violations, penalties within the zoning code. Did I provide that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, 6 out. Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, interesting. I didn't provide this as a red line version.
Yeah, I've
Or
got
did
it as a red line.
Oh, okay. I just didn't give myself
Go
one.
in the back.
Yeah, I just didn't give myself one. Okay, so.
You want mine?
You can have mine because I'm gonna head out.
Okay. So when we adopted the zoning code in 2017, I had proposed various enforcement penalties that could be implemented, and one of those was a criminal penalty, and somehow that didn't make it in, and I don't know if there was opposition to that or if there was an oversight. But there's a reason for including both civil, or several reasons for including both civil and criminal penalties. The first is that you can. There's no reason that you cannot have a code and say any violation of this code is a civil penalty, and also any violation of this code is a criminal penalty. There's no, those aren't exclusive. And then giving that discretion allows you, number one, to use civil penalties in most cases, because most cases just don't rise to the level of criminal. Criminal has a much higher standard of proof. You have to generally prove intent, and you have the option of jury trials, and a criminal charge can drag out for a year or two just to get it prosecuted. So a criminal charge is something you use only when it's really warranted. And there are times when, most zoning violations, for example, are just oversights. They're people don't know, or they just want to, kind of sneak a little bit. Most aren't such egregious intent that you would want to go criminal, but there are those cases where you have someone who's just flat. Their intent is, screw the law, I'm going to do this. And then the other, which is probably more important, is that you'll see various codes that say that you can get a warrant. The code enforcement officer code is that way, that if entry is denied onto property, then get a warrant. The problem is that in Washington State, administrative warrants do not exist. They do in some states, but the Washington State Supreme Court has ruled years ago that we don't do administrative warrants in the state of Washington. So the only way to get a warrant is if there is the potential of a criminal charge, if you are investigating a potential criminal act. And so, we had one case here recently where we were anticipating we have a contractor who is known for covering up his work and not getting permits. And I was able to post a stop work order, but we were anticipating him just not letting us in. He had covered the windows so you couldn't see in and all of this. And he was basically saying, well, I'm just going to do it and I'll sell the house and there's nothing you can do about it. Without this provision, there was no way we could have tried to get a warrant to go in and find out exactly what he was doing and deal with it.
Do you use notice to title in instances where you have?
We do not, because, and I've found it once and I've never been able to find it again, but there is actually something in the RCW that essentially says if you do a notice if you cloud the title without a lawful order to back it up, you can actually be prosecuted, you as a jurisdiction. And so absent an abatement order, an abatement action, you can't just record something on the title and just leave it that way. A lot of jurisdictions do it. In Lakewood, our attorneys looked into it and said, no, do not do that. I do not do that here. The county does it. I would love to do it. I've got a case right now where people are just basically saying, nah, we've just moved out of the house. We're just going to leave it until someday we're ready to sell it. We're just not going to deal with it because you guys are unreasonable and we want nothing to do with Port Orchard. It's a case where a big addition was done without permit. And they've taken an attitude that because we've come after them, Port Orchard is nasty and they don't even want to live here or even ever want to set foot in Port Orchard again. We're just icky. So that's a case where we may have to just kind of try and watch that place for years so that we can catch it when it sells. I would love to be able to just flag it, but no. So that's what I'm proposing here, is just to add the other lawful orders in B, to add the criminal penalty in C, and then also something that I'm hoping will fix on a global scale in the code enforcement officer chapter later when I get a chance to work on that. But right now in that section it says every 5 days of a violation is a separate offense. And never seen that before anywhere. It does not make sense. It makes enforcement really difficult. So I'd like to put in here specifically that every day is a separate offense.
Okay.
And that would be standard language.
And I was going to point out, we did discuss this as part of the 2017 update, and I know that some of our local engineers are really upset because we did include criminal penalties in the subdivision portion of Title 20, and they didn't want this, but we went forward with it. But we had just moved section 20.02 over from the existing code and didn't tweak that at this time, but it should be consistent and have criminal penalties. And so the only thing I would make sure that our attorney does before this would be brought forward is to make sure that the language in the subdivision chapter that was new matches the language in 2002, or at least is compatible.
Do you have a provision in code that where you have an abatement order or some sort of code compliance established on a piece of property that no further permits may be issued for that property?
No. Actually, where we have an abatement order, we typically want permits to be issued. We want them to come in.
Related to that particular code compliance.
Yeah.
So let's say you've got an ADU over here and now they want to do a garage addition. You
No.
hold the garage addition hostage until they
Until they fix the other issues.
And I'm not sure if we can. I know that we cannot deny issuance of a building permit, for example, because they don't have a business license or something like that. There's something that where it's very specific criteria for issuing a building permit, and you cannot deny issuance based on other things that are unrelated. So I don't know exactly the answer to that. What I will end up doing in the case of that other house is just posting it as unfit for occupancy because of the work that's been done. And so then that gives us some hold because it's a misdemeanor to remove that posting. And that's one thing that is, we do have the criminal in for that, and we do have this language in for the fire code, just not for the remainder of Title 20.
Right. So did you want comments on these?
Well, I guess what I'd be looking for is if there's support, then we bring this to the full council.
Well, this goes to planning commission first.
Oh, okay.
Development regulation.
So go forward. I guess that's what we're looking for, is approval to go forward with it.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem, and I like your comment about having it sync up with the language of there.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't have any problem. The definition of vehicle could be construed as it's proposed to also include bicycles and those kind of things.
Oh, and the nuisance.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let me give you. Number one, I just plain made an error in what I sent out on the nuisance section, and then on the proposed revision to 20.66, I had not gotten comments back from the attorney at the time I sent this out. So I have updated for both of those.
Is this,
Just, yeah.
Is this one packet?
No, just take one and pass it.
I think I just grabbed one.
Yeah, those are the updated. So yeah, to move to the vehicle stuff. The
Blue line instead of red line.
pardon?
Do you have an extra copy for the plan?
Yeah.
There you go.
Toss these earlier ones.
Yes.
So what is this one?
Stapled on this
Yeah. So the 2066 is something that was already adopted, and it's something I wrote years ago, and then we had a particular problem here that needed to be addressed, and so I grabbed that and put that forward, and that was adopted. But I was never happy with it. It needed work, and so that's what I'm proposing, is the improvements that really needed, including definitions and taking out the provision that said that work had to be related to a member of someone living on the premises or a member of their family, limited by blood, adoption, etc., which is it's not a defensible provision. Courts have ruled extensively on what constitutes a family, and there's no that provision in there was not at all defensible, and not really reasonable. It's best to just limit it to the people who live there. If you need to work on your friend's car, go to their house. Work on it at their house.
I see in here that in the definitions you define major work and minor work.
Yes.
And then the rest of this document we just refer to work as implied definition. Does that need to be cleaned up?
Yeah, it should be clarified.
Did you refer to it here?
Yeah, because
Minor.
basically the work is referring to all of, to both.
major or minor.
And then it's only separated in certain.
I wonder if you need to add a definition of work or.
Yeah, work would include major and
Or
minor.
just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Look at number 7. Hereinafter referred as work. It does have a definition.
Okay, there we go.
And number 2, I think other parts, at least in the earlier draft I looked at, referred to it as major parts or components. And you have
Yeah.
and.
We have it in subsection 6.
So,
I had a question about,
Yeah.
you added some language under the painting of vehicles or equipment or testing of alarm or sound system is prohibited, whether inside or out. So if I install a sound system into my car, I couldn't.
that was one I kind of wrestled with a little bit, but the idea, of course, is to prevent the
Somebody from
the guy who's
stereo
going to
shop.
be, you know, or excuse me, that their definition of a sound system is going to be really different from yours.
Right.
You know, theirs is going to include speakers like this and all of that. And that's one of those where I kind of come back to, if you're not creating a problem, there's not
Yeah.
going to be any enforcement. It's one of those that, yeah, it could theoretically be taken too far. Just like the definition of vehicle could theoretically encompass a bicycle. But the reality is, it's, you know.
Well, I don't know if anybody's going to latch onto that, but the plain interpretation of that is such that somebody might say, well, I can't install an alarm system in my car and then check it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah,
Hear
it
that.
could
Wasn't
be.
checking, it just went off.
Yeah, there are several things in here that are like that could be
Right.
taken too far. If
Right.
taken absolutely at face value, they
Yeah.
would be unreasonable.
And I saw the, and I'm going to loosely paraphrase, the inoperable vehicle part. It speaks to missing components, including things like bumpers.
Right.
But if I've got a 1965 MG in my yard, and I'm looking across the country for that bumper, I don't know if we would want to. I don't know how you would pursue that actually.
This is a difficult area of enforcement
Yeah.
because of exactly those kind of things.
Right.
Again, I more or less just come back to
What you're gonna go after.
what's going to be reasonable enforcement.
Right.
It sounds like
Yeah, it's a bit of a soup.
be
Yeah.
vetted by the planning commission and then maybe come back and hear their comments.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem, and I know there was a problem on Bay Street.
And the original version of this is what enabled me to deal with that. But even as I did that, this was really poorly written.
What was the issue on Bay Street?
They're at Mitchell Point, so right the 90-degree curve on Bay. There's a guy who's been there for several years working on cars, and he buys them at auction. He would rebuild them there. He'd be day and night and weekends running the engines, pounding. He was doing body work. He was when I finally really got some serious charges on him. He was parting out a vehicle, and so he was cutting parts off of it, and and he ended up just spilling oil all over the place. And so I was getting constant complaints. And then at one point he was working on a fuel pump on a car, and he had a battery sitting there on the ground next to where he was working, and he spilled gasoline all over the place, and he ended up lighting the car on fire in the right of way. And so there's this blazing car there, blocked traffic.
There's videos of it, I think.
When was this?
That was about a year and a half ago. The fire was.
Okay.
And then I finally got him stopped about a year ago. I finally ended up just piling up some pretty serious, like $1,200 in tickets against him, and the similar amount against his mom, who's the property owner, because she was turning a blind eye to it. But this was what enabled me. I had been fighting it for over a year unsuccessfully under the previous code. So this was what enabled me to deal with that.
Okay.
It's not a big problem here in Port Orchard. There are only a handful of places I've encountered where this is a problem. I am really looking forward to getting these fixed, though, because this is Crawford Road is where I really need these provisions. All of Crawford Road is doing this.
Yeah, that was like
That's that
close
area
to the
that,
cyclone.
We just rezoned
Just
the-
barely
yeah.
missed.
So it's
really
now
tight.
conforming, it's single family.
Right.
But
And so that's where one of these changes takes, it had previously said in the public right-of-way, well,
Right.
Crawford Road is a private road, and they've got it so blocked up with vehicles that are being worked on, you can't get a police car down through there, you can't get a fire truck down through there. So this needed to be opened up to address
Somebody
also.
opened our doorbell there, and I didn't know where to park. It's like, oh
Yeah.
my god.
so
It's like Appalachia.
this chapter would not normally go to the planning commission. We can certainly take it to the planning commission, but this is a nuisance chapter. It's not a land use regulation.
Well, the 2066.
2066 would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Darn.
So as a companion piece, I think it makes sense.
Okay.
And then, do we want it to come back to this group or work study? I'm okay with it going to work study at that point.
Okay.
All right.
It seems non-controversial.
The one thing I would point out that is really questionable in the nuisance one, and just a brief little background where this came from. These are things that I rewrote when I was in Lakewood, and this stuff was an enormous problem in Lakewood. It was one of the reasons people voted for incorporation, was all of the vehicle service and cars full of, or yards full of cars being worked on, and people found every angle to get around the codes. And if it said that an unlicensed vehicle, well, they'd get a collector plate on their vehicle. It doesn't expire. They don't have to get emissions tests, and now you've just defeated that whole code. Things like that. And so we went with, instead of trying to regulate based on insurance and registration, to go to what does the vehicle look like. You can have a car sitting in your driveway with no engine and no transmission, but it's a collector car. It's well maintained. It's not hurting a thing. You're working on it. But yet another car that actually runs, it's the appearance and the condition of the car that impacts the neighbors. And so we made it so that it has to do with the condition, but then that also the flip side of that is, well, okay, but what you're calling a junk vehicle is the only thing I have to get to and from work. Or school. And so we created this provision in here that says an exemption is a vehicle that's an individual's or family's sole source of transportation, provided that it is legally operable, it's in a condition that's legally operable on the road, and the burden of proof is on the owner. I think that's a kind of a questionable provision, but that was the only way I was able to come up with to balance that, so that we're not going after somebody's legitimate transportation. So I just point that out for thought. I have not come up with a different way to address that.
They're looking at that junk vehicle. That's my ride, man.
Right?
That's operable.
Yeah,
I mean, my car's 20 years old.
yeah.
I'm sure some people think it's
It's a collector vehicle.
Yeah, because that was the thing. The code, it used to have to do with whether or not the vehicle was operable. But okay, so you can start it up. That doesn't mean it's not a piece of junk that you never do use, and it sits there rotting in your front yard. And so that's why we went to apparently inoperable.
And Scott, you mentioned a old MG, which I think inherently is inoperable. We need to protect our residents from British vehicles.
Yeah, that's true.
I won't get in the middle of that one.
Yeah.
So then the final item would be the private sales, for lack of a better term, which encompasses yard sale, garage sale, etc. So that's why I use the term private sale as a catch-all for all of that. Here again, in Port Orchard, this is not a big problem. I could have brought forward some regulations that, again, were from a city where this was a huge problem. But we do have one particular location that has been a problem for the last couple of years and is likely to continue to do so. It's generated complaints, and so I was asked to put together some thoughts, something for the council to consider. Probably right on top.
Just a memo here.
Yeah, it's 2-page. Yeah.
Oh, it's the man.
Yeah, so
was
there's
it a constant? Were they selling all the time, or?
it's just right up the top of the hill here. They, according to one of the spouses, number one, they did have an antique dealership, and two, the other spouse just is kind of addicted to shopping for antiques, and so number one, they closed the store. So now they have the entire house, basement, garage, and multiple canopies in the yard full of antiques.
I know what you're talking about.
In fact, the first time I visited a couple of years ago, they were showing me they had just finally gotten room to walk through their living room.
This is on Sydney?
Kitsap.
Yeah.
So they've been selling all of this outside, but other people are saying they're continuing to bring in as much as they're selling.
Yeah,
So
they seem to have one every Saturday.
yeah. And so that generated a lot of complaints, and I was asked to at least bring it forward for discussion as to whether or not this council wants to
Isn't that considered
try to
running a
regulate
business? Is
this.
that non-conforming? They have a business license?
It is, but the thing is, without something in the code, at what point does your yard sale become a business? There's no criteria.
There's no threshold.
and it gets very difficult. That was kind of the thing with the cars on Bay Street. You know, the zoning code says you can't do auto repair as a business. Well, okay, at what point? Where's that threshold? Without some criteria, then it's left for someone in enforcement to try to say, well, at some point it crossed the line, but you can't really say where the line is, and so you can't really say when it crossed that line. So I surveyed some of the other jurisdictions in the state. I got back a variety of responses, and some do regulate them, some don't. Typical of the ones who do regulate is they typically allow 2 or 3 sales a year. Some allow 4. Lakewood, we allowed 4. Some of them get even more specific and say only 1 per quarter, but no more than 3 per year. Or you can have 1 per year, and then we have the 1 community-wide day that you can have. So you can have 2, but one of them has to be the community-wide day. You know, some of them get really, really specific. So I've got some sample provisions, some of the things that other jurisdictions do. One of the good ones is saying that basically everything has to belong to the residents and not be purchased or made for resale.
So out of your list of ideas here, I'm not in favor of requiring permits.
And I would agree with that. Here, it's not. Again, in Lakewood, that was needed.
Yeah.
It was happening enough all over the place. We needed a way to track it. Here, I would not support that. It's just not that big of a problem here.
I'd like to see your time decrease too, you know, maybe like an 8 to 5 type of a deal, but creating traffic till 9 o'clock at night seems a little unnecessary.
For a residential area,
For
yeah.
residential.
That's reasonable. I am definitely on the fence because it doesn't bother me that there's a house that has a store there. If it looks like a tent, so when it's not in operation, it's covered. But I did wonder, it seemed like every weekend they had a lot of stuff to sell. They had thousands of DVDs.
It's not a store, is it?
Well, that's,
Saying a house with a store.
No, I'm just thinking, what if it were a store? You know, we probably wouldn't. I mean, as a neighbor, it didn't bother me.
Yeah.
You could walk over and buy something there.
But then you'd be in violation of all of your zoning regulations for parking and traffic.
I'm not an immediate neighbor.
And
I
all of
live
that,
like
yeah.
a block
Right.
or two away. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And two, then they're essentially running a business without business license, without paying taxes, without collecting sales tax. They're basically getting by all of the regulations that apply to businesses.
Are you looking for guidance on this today?
Doesn't have to be today. I was just asked to present options to the council, so that's my goal, is just to present it and
Does this have
Well,
to go
I'm-
through planning commission as well?
Depends whether it's in the land use code or not. I don't know where you were planning on putting this if we had something, whether it would be in chapter 9 or 8.
I would say it would either be in the land use code or in the business license code, Title 5.
So I would
Go ahead.
well, just thinking about how the new land use code is written, it seems to me that a garage sale or an estate sale is a accessory use because it's customarily associated with a detached house or a residential type use. And so in that table we have provisions for accessory uses, the ones that have additional criteria. I think we would want to add it there to that list.
So it would basically be fleshing out that accessory, the definition
Yeah.
of at what level it constitutes an accessory use.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, do we allow it in all zones but only associated with a detached house? Do we allow them in apartments? Does an apartment complex get to have garage sales?
I think if we are okay with limiting the number of events on a calendar year basis, sure.
Okay. So basically anywhere that has residential dwellings can have a garage sale, and then we would just add these as conditions of the use.
So, I'm okay with the first bullet, if you will, where it talks about number of events. I'm okay with 4 as a number. And I would say limited to 3 days per event. Otherwise, you're kind of bleeding into typically weekdays, except for those 3-day weekends.
Yeah. A lot of people like to start their sales on Fridays, and so if it's a 3-day weekend, they'll go Friday through Monday.
Okay.
You know.
Well, I don't necessarily care too much. Whether it's 3 or 4.
Yeah, and that would be one where you can kind of give a little extra without really losing a whole lot,
Yeah.
and make the impact of it less a little bit.
Then we talked limited hours of 8 to 5. No permit required. And then at the bottom, I'm okay with having signs removed fairly quickly, or else they're forgot about.
Yeah,
Well, I would just say the sign code, the signs issue is in the sign code, not in this chapter,
Right.
and so they get the same protections as anybody else as a
Okay.
content neutral type speech.
yeah. I thought you could maybe throw it in. You couldn't enforce it, but you could maybe throw it in there just as a
Yeah,
to get your
informational.
signs
Yeah.
down.
The other thing you might want to put in here is combination sales or garage sales are encouraged. Where 2 households get together.
neighborhood sales. Or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
I don't know
the
what
first
to call it.
Saturday in McCormick or
Yeah.
in June.
Good weekend to go away.
Yeah.
It's the traffic there. They need a shuttles. It's kind of fun though. It's
No, it's
crazy.
fun. It's
Yeah.
just, it's crazy, man.
We
Those
should
are
do
my
that.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess just one other would be: would you want to have any different provisions for like nonprofit rummage sales or anything like that? One jurisdiction, allowed rummage sales could be 30 days. And you could have one 30-day event. I don't know what it's. I've never seen a rummage sale go for 30 days, but
Would that be included in this? Because, I mean, if we're going to have rummage sales associated with a nonprofit, it seems like that would be an accessory use to the church or the
That's
other
true.
fraternal organization or whatever it might be.
And there again, I have not seen that as a problem here.
Yeah,
so
I think we can leave it out for now.
Okay.
Right. So strictly as a
It's
resident.
actually gonna be 4 events, 4 days.
Okay. Well, that's all I've got.
Thank you. Then the next item, Fred had asked that we talk about affordable housing. I know that there's some proposed legislation to help address this. There's quite a bit of proposed legislation.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going. There was a long, well, it's only 3 hours, but it seemed long.
Short version.
That this is from one of the my big
You attended?
Yeah,
Okay.
I attended. They presented out of order because all the speakers could get here because of the ferries. The most interesting one I thought was when Ann Fritzel's presentation, which came last, unfortunately. She presented different types of housing, which I think are very much covered in our form-based code. And this got me thinking that, as the ADUs is actually something that's very topical now. I think Seattle's talking about it. They're talking about it on the state level where they would basically allow, I don't know, it's a Senate bill. But my takeaway was that, is there a way that we could streamline the process? Now, for example, I might be a test case because I'm considering this on my property. So I was thinking maybe we could create, or I could be the example of what people need to go through to figure out how to site it and how to permit it. I've also heard that some cities like, I don't know, I think Lacey and even Clovis in California have what they call pre-approved plans. So they're providing them to people like, okay, you can do these 3 plans on your property with appropriate siting. And I thought that might be an interesting thing to consider. For example, I have no development background. So I would just be probably very vulnerable to someone saying, "Oh, it's going to cost $90,000," and I'm thinking that's a lot.
Yeah. So I think where we're at right now, what we just adopted, is more flexible than what we had previously, but it still does require an agreement with the city and an ADU permit. Basically, to get the permit, you sign an agreement that's recorded that is going to say that one of the 2 units will be owner occupied. You can get rid of the owner occupied requirement and just permit these things outright, and I think that would be the next step to making this easier to do. As we were bringing this through the process, I thought about going back and tweaking this, but we really didn't discuss ADUs a whole lot as part of this exercise. The Planning Commission worked on it 1.5 years ago, came up with the ADU land use policy, and then we just rolled it into our code update without really taking a closer look at it. But I'm not opposed to allowing them just outright and not having that additional condition. I think, and one of the pieces of legislation that the state was considering was allowing 2 ADUs per
2,
property.
Yeah.
Right.
So basically, you could have 3 dwelling units on every lot in the city, and is that something? Is that a direction that we want to go?
What's the minimum lot size for that, though? Didn't we specify that there had to be?
That legislation didn't
Remember?
specify amount.
Yeah, it
Is it
didn't.
a 6,000 square foot lot or?
No, it didn't specify it. And I will point out, Minneapolis made news earlier this year, or maybe late last year, because they basically said that we are not going to zone for exclusively single-family neighborhoods in a year. They said every neighborhood in Minneapolis is going to allow at least 3 units per lot, whether it's a house with ADUs, whether it's a triplex or a duplex with an ADU. They said 3 units per lot across the entire city was their approach, and they said that the entire practice of zoning to create single-family neighborhoods was effectively sort of dividing cities and creating areas that were exclusive. And so that, I think is a national trend. I think that they're on the forefront of that, and you're going to see that become more prevalent here going forward. I think we took a half a step in that direction with our form-based code. And I think going to ADUs on every lot without an owner occupancy requirement would be another half a step in that direction.
Well, I think that's a good long term thing to think about, because I know that there would be concern about making additional rental units in what's considered an owner-occupied neighborhood. I also don't know that it would be universal to all the neighborhoods of the city. For example, would an HOA even allow accessory dwelling units?
Well, so that's, we wouldn't get involved in that.
Right, that would supersede.
I mean, that
But
would be
and that wasn't my, that was things I was wondering about. But specifically, I was thinking, well, I would like to consider this, and I was just wondering, what is the process like? How
Yeah.
can it be streamlined? You're
Yeah, as I've thought about how our code has taken shape and what we've adopted, I mean, I think in our comprehensive plan, the R1 zone becomes your exclusive single-family neighborhood where maybe ADUs are allowed only with owner occupancy, and then in R2 you could permit it totally outright. Right now, the way that it's written, though, if you want an ADU, you have to have the agreement recorded that says that it'll be owner occupied and outlines the conditions.
I like that starting point.
I do
Just
too.
to be able
I don't have a problem with
monitor
that
it.
because I'm more
Otherwise,
excited.
you could just
It
turn
is not without its headaches, especially where you've got somebody who is renting one out for VRBO, especially on tide lines.
Sure.
The county will tell you that. But I think that's a good step in the right direction. Fred, where you're talking about pre-approved plans, those are typically canned ADUs, as I understand.
What do you mean by canned?
Well, they're like a basic set of plans that you get.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
not
like this
every-
is a layout or something.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this at some point.
We did.
a while ago.
So there's two ways to go here, and we allow for a basic plan set to be approved, but somebody has to actually put those plans on file and pay for the plan review fee.
Right.
So if we wanted to solicit designs, that would be something where we would maybe need to help things along by actually funding the design of ADUs. The other idea that I had suggested about a year ago was that there's a couple companies in Seattle that build prefab ADUs where they bring the thing on a truck and they plop it down on a foundation that you have poured, and we could approve a prefab ADU as a way to really streamline things as opposed to having a off-the-shelf plan that then has to be inspected like a regular building. So one thing that we could do is we could actually reach out to these companies and potentially consider doing a plan review for these things. But I think there's maybe a gifting of public funds thing where if we're approving plan sets that somebody else owns or that somebody else sells as a prefab building, are we giving them a benefit? Is there enough of a market to justify them actually voluntarily submitting this to us? We'd have to look at that a little bit more closely. But I think if council wanted to throw some funding at this to do like a competition where we're going to choose 3 plans and have them approved for a basic plan at the expense of the city, we could do it as sort of a design competition to encourage these things.
That'd be kind of neat.
I think that's a neat idea.
Yeah.
I would encourage that. I think it would allow us to maintain the look and feel of the historic neighborhood. Well, I'm thinking of my neighborhood, obviously.
Yeah.
You want continuity with the design standards that you've been working so diligently
Yeah.
on.
There is a company in Portland called Dwell that has prefab units, and I know that they also do. They do 2 things. They either sell it to you or they install it and they rent back your land and then you own it after 25 years. And I thought, well, I think it's a neat idea. I don't think this is the proper market for it. It's probably more Seattle or a bigger city. But I was intrigued by the idea that you could have a unit placed on your property that you didn't have to pay for up front. So
Yeah. I suppose the other idea is that if you're interested in doing this yourself, whatever plan you have approved, you could have it approved as a basic plan so that
Okay.
other people could use it.
Okay.
As long as whoever designs it for you, I mean,
There's one.
you could be our guinea pig on this.
Be careful with that type of an arrangement though, Fred. I mean, you're backing yourself into a corner if you ever need to sell your property and there's a 25-year encumbrance on it.
well, yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's not appealing to me. I was trying to figure out how old will I be in 25 years, and the return, and it's like,
Well, and stuff happens. Life happens, right?
oh, but the 90,000 investment that I just heard from people, I was thinking, how long would it take to recoup that?
Yeah.
Depends on your idea of affordable housing.
Well,
Right.
Is it $50 a month or is it $1,500 a month?
Right.
in the middle.
I don't know if I.
But they are, I
90
mean, obviously,
seems-
they're very expensive to build per square foot because
Yeah.
of all of the attributes, the kitchen, the bath, right? You have a small, but that's the most expensive piece of it, and so,
Yeah.
you know, I could see you spending $500-600 a foot on an ADU like
Do you think
that.
that much? I heard like 100 to 125, and I thought that's
high.
I
low.
don't know. All the plumbing and electrical and foundation
Yeah,
work
that's
and
right.
How much for that? I figure each of those 5,000, 10,000.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you had a 500 square foot, you know, at $500, $25,000 for all that, that seems pretty
It's going to
reasonable.
be a really small unit, 350 to
Yeah.
400 square feet.
I think the other thing that we need to look at that was not part of the zoning code is that our water sewer connection language, it currently has exemptions for mother-in-law apartments from connection fees, and I think actually establishing a policy that the ADU is considered part of a dwelling rather than a separate monthly charge on your water
That's
bill,
another-
or
yeah.
that there's a separate connection fee. I think that's something that's going to go a long way towards making these things viable, because if you got to pay $15,000 in a water and a sewer connection fee versus being able to use the existing fee associated with the house, especially if it's a 200 or 300 square foot unit, it doesn't have the equivalent impact of a full house. But you know,
But you still have to look at septic designs and things of that nature you can't add, right?
yeah,
It would still have to fit the current plan.
Mine
I'm
would
just going to go back.
mine would hook up to the the city sewer, but yeah, what is that connection? Yeah. And I did wonder about the what is the ongoing billing? Is it just another unit that you're paying storm and sewer on?
No, yeah, I sent this to you.
That would be consistent.
I sent you
with
these
trying to
these
create
links
affordable
How
Yeah.
long ago?
in
Just
a
last
little
year.
over a year
housing,
ago.
existing meter.
Yep.
Yeah.
When did you send that?
Over a year ago.
I sent this in 2018. These are some examples of prefab backyard cottage plans that had been approved. This was
I like that one.
this is one that you can
400 square feet.
buy the building. They'll just come plop it on your site, and in a day or two, it's totally up and running.
Wow.
Once you have a foundation.
You know how much that costs?
Can you forward that to all of us again?
Yeah, yeah. They had a neat time lapse video of this thing.
Was that Clovis?
This is over in West Seattle somewhere.
Okay.
But yeah, this thing just shows up in cubes, and they put it on a foundation, and your building's totally done in just a couple of days. It was. I don't know how to turn down the volume here.
I'd be curious to see what
Wow.
something like that would cost. It's just-
Yeah.
Because you still have a lot of the houses rented.
I
Well, that's a
can't imagine
two-story.
that less than
Yeah.
120,000.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just
But
Two-story.
even 80-90 was sounding prohibitive. I thought,
so yeah, then there's just
That's
a little bit of
nice,
finish work to do
That's
once
nice
you're
looking.
once you get it up and running. So there is this. This is another single-story plan, and this is more of a modern
$100,000 a day for that
Uh,
crane.
type
Yeah,
600
yeah.
square foot backyard building.
Mobilizing that's gonna be.
But I'll forward this to you.
Okay.
Interesting, though.
Get it to Scott Diener's correct address. And Fred, I'll forward this to you again.
Fred, were there any other? I looked through this, and it seemed like we are. I mean, there's always more we can be doing, but it seems like with form-based code and everything, we
send
that's what
we're
my
ahead of the
impression was
curve
that
for
we.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was.
Was there anything else that jumped out at you?
Oh no, but there is something that I wanted to bring up. The county is. This is something that I got in a letter to the severe weather shelter managers, because that concern was the homeless and the unsheltered. And one of the bullet points from the county, and I can forward this, was that the county is partnering with the city of Bremerton to fund an affordable housing inventory and market analysis to identify affordable housing needs throughout the county and city, to make recommendations for strategies the county can take to increase the production of housing units that are affordable to low-income households. I was wondering if we might want to consider participating in this inventory, because one of the questions I have is like, what are the demographics of South Kitsap? How many people? What are our standards for what is affordable or not? We think that we have a great deal, which may be the case. And yet I was wondering if we want to piggyback on their inventory. just to see what is available in the county. And I guess Bremerton, I don't see why we wouldn't be participating.
I think it's hard because if you look at the definitions of affordable housing, right, then I think we could all agree that in South Kitsap we have a lot of.
Yes.
But but if you are truly homeless, and I mean, it's not affordable,
Right.
Yeah.
right?
But
I mean,
proportionally, we're
and so we
better
might
off than.
spend a bunch of money to realize what we already have, and it doesn't solve the problem at hand. You know, we may have a lot of units under $1,200
Can
a
I
month,
see
but
that?
what good is that?
I think
And I'll forward it.
I think the thing that we need to look at more closely. So we said that once we got the zoning code done, we would revisit the property tax abatement, and I think as part of that process is where we need to define that. And what Seattle did was they said that 5% of units in an abatement area have to be affordable to people that are, 40% of
Correct.
median income, which includes Bainbridge and Silverdale. But once you're down at 40, that's a really low number, even relative to Port Orchard.
And I agree that solves the issue that we're just debating.
Well, so and this reads to me like they're partnering with the city to look at the issue county and citywide.
The city of Bremerton wide.
Well, throughout the county and city. Oh, so
I think
county
they
is just the
mean
county,
Bremerton, yeah.
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 When I first
yeah.
read it and I heard county, I thought, oh, that's everyone.
Right. I think you're right.
But I don't think they're, Paulsville, Bainbridge, and us.
Well, what are your thoughts?
I've also.
I haven't seen that
I
either.
will forward this. I've often thought that the area between Tremont and the jail and Klein and Sydney was a potential area for redevelopment, but there hasn't been interest from developers. And one way that may make it more appealing is maybe if it's easier for people to put in an ADU.
Well, but it's more than just ADUs, right? It's primary ownership. So, maybe something to start thinking about is how do you incentivize those, and maybe get a hold of Doug Washburn with the county or Eric Baker and see what it would look like to participate in that.
Yeah. I think that they're trying to identify the need, whereas there's a whole lot of things we can throw at the wall to see what sticks in terms of incentivizing this. And as we look at the tax abatement issue, we may want to just look at only the 12-year abatement with those criteria so that we're truly generating that type of housing. But I guess what the inventory could get at, and I think what Councilmember Clausen has stated, is he feels like we already have a ton of affordable housing. And so do we really want to be the part of the county that takes even more of that?
I think it would be good to have that information because, yes, we could push back on
Yeah.
that and say we.
Yeah, and you got to be careful too because you could upset the overall real estate economy, right? If you already have enough and now you add more, you're impacting the entire real estate.
Or we
I
would
think
say
we're
we
talking
don't need
about
to add
different
more.
kinds of affordable housing too. Our housing stock versus what they're talking about is new housing stock.
Well, and at the same time, as if you give the 8-year abatement and you bring new apartments online that are maybe a little bit nicer, all the old apartments are probably going to become more affordable just from a competitive standpoint.
Supply and demand.
Yeah, so it's you don't necessarily have to build more new affordable housing if the existing stock becomes affordable as a result of just having more new apartments.
Correct. More competitive environment.
So some of the stuff that they talked about to help incentivize modifying how you look at SEPA, for example, I didn't see as really big barriers to begin with.
No. Yeah, I would agree. I don't think that's the issue. I mean, I think probably the biggest issue is the offsite improvement costs of development in the city because we have such big infrastructure challenges. I mean, that's a bigger barrier than anything else, and
Yeah.
we don't have a good funding source for that.
All right, so it's a moving conversation. Are you going to look into that a little bit more, or?
Sure. You mean in terms of the?
Understanding the scope of what that is and
I
whether
can
there's
write
room
them.
for a partner.
I'll forward this
what
around.
that looks like.
I can.
Yes, send that on to me and ask my colleagues about their involvement. And
Find out where to put
Okay. Anything else?
No, I don't think so.
All right, we're done.
All right.